The debate on nuclear energy in this country is a farce. There is one reason and one reason alone Peter Dutton and the Liberals are trying to push nuclear. And it's not because they're pro-nuclear, it's because they're anti-renewable. You can think nuclear is a good option for Australia. You can even think it's the best option for Australia. But if we're going to have a genuine conversation about the pros and cons of nuclear, it is important to understand the context in which we're having that discussion. And in my opinion, Peter Dutton and the Liberals are framing this whole conversation dishonestly. They are not pro-nuclear, they're anti-renewable. And that's dangerous for our future.
Let's start out with this simple question. Is the cost of nuclear energy as high?
According to the CSIRO and AEMO, a large-scale nuclear reactor would cost about $16 billion. Nuclear energy would be about twice the cost of renewable alternatives.
As bad as Anthony Albanese,
the International Energy Agency, that is very much pro-nuclear energy, says that Australia is not an appropriate venue because of the comparative advantages that we have.
Chris Bowen.
I can't think of a worse fit for Australia than nuclear energy. It's extraordinarily expensive. We don't have a nuclear industry in Australia, so we'd be starting from scratch. There's no plan on what to do with the waste. It's very slow to build. There are only 2 small modular reactors at the moment anywhere in the world, one on a barge in Russia and one in China, neither of them working commercially.
Are trying to make it out to be.
Well, I think we should let the facts speak for themselves.
Very daunting experience having to take the case for nuclear energy straight to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy himself on live TV.
Look, we should have all options on the table, and what I would say is I'd bring out, this is the ban on nuclear energy. It's a single A4 piece of paper. And if the government was serious about reaching net zero and having a guaranteed path to net zero, well, they'd get rid of this.
I don't know why, with all our abundant renewable energy, I can't think of a worse thing to do than to then take the most expensive form of energy and try and retrofit it into a country with so much cheap renewable energy. It's just the wrong plan for our country.
Kieran, if you go outside in Australia, you can fry an egg on a footpath. We have the best solar resources in the world.
He's got to be joking. Seriously, it was 5 degrees in Melbourne today. There was no wind, 0 wind. So what was keeping the lights on?
And today we announced 7 locations that we have looked at in great detail over a long period of time that can host new nuclear sites, and that will be part of an energy mix, obviously with renewables and significant amounts of gas into the system, particularly in the interim period. I don't support the establishment of big nuclear facilities here at all. I'm opposed to it.
So who is Peter Dutton? Peter Dutton is the current leader of the opposition, meaning if the Liberals get enough seats at the next election, he becomes the Prime Minister of our country. He has a huge resume behind him. Initially, he was a police officer, and then when he got into the Parliament, his ministerial positions were all over the shop. I'm going to read you them now. I tried memorizing them, and I genuinely couldn't. He was elected to Dixon in 2001, and then it was the Minister for Workplace Participation, Assistant Treasurer of Australia, Minister for Sport, Minister for Health, Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Minister for Home Affairs, Leader of the House, Minister for Defence, Leader of the Liberal Party, and now Leader of the Opposition. That is a lot of roles. Truthfully, I'm not sure how much expertise he had in any one of those particular roles. You may also remember Peter Dutton from The Voice to Parliament, where this man was, in my opinion, paralysed by fear, feeling as though that there weren't enough concrete details, and feeling as though without those details, it was impossible to make an educated decision or even consider it as something that, could help the Indigenous community. I wonder if there's any parallels to that and the lack of information we have around nuclear energy in this country. Nevertheless, if the Liberals won the next election, he would be the Prime Minister. He would be the one leading this country. At the bare minimum, he's still the leader of the opposition, meaning he will debate policies and politics in Parliament. He is trying to get the Australian public on his side, and he controls the Liberal Party. And if you want to get things through the House, or specifically the Senate, you either need to work with the Liberals, the Greens, or some of the independents. And every so often, Labor and the Liberals come together. Every so often, the Greens and the Liberals come together. It's important to understand the motives and the leader of the party. And I think something that's really important about Peter Dutton is he was initially perceived to be unelectable. They were literally running articles about how he's not a monster. He was seen as this very inhuman, unemotional, real political golem. I can imagine a child seeing Monsters, Inc., accidentally seeing a Peter Dutton interview and feeling as though their screams are going to be siphoned when inevitably his nuclear energy policy falls through and he's got nothing else to rely on. The point being, though, the motivation is simply and only to be electable, to get into power. It doesn't matter if a policy is realistic or even viable, full stop. Can you create enough of a dissenting opinion, or can you infiltrate a discussion about policy to where the Australian people believe that you might have a better solution, that you would be a better leader, taking people to a more interesting or safe direction for the country? It doesn't matter if you can actually achieve your goals. Can you convince enough people that you do believe them? This is a man who was paralyzed with fear over the voice. It didn't matter that there was a good vision. It didn't matter that it was plausible or it could help people. In the moment, he did not believe there was enough information for us to even take the risk. And that was for an advisory panel within the government. We are talking about how we are going to get energy to the people of this country. And Dutton has one goal and one goal alone: convince people that he is the better solution. It doesn't matter if it's the truth. It matters that people believe it to be true. We're going to try and cut through what people believe to be true, though, and actually look at what evidence supports. I'm interested in a couple of questions. Where do we store the waste? Where are the nuclear facilities going to be placed? What's the risk? What's the cost? What's the timeline? How do you even lift the ban? And I think pretty importantly, why is there a ban on nuclear energy?
Of course! Nuclear power!
It's the job of tomorrow. Today!
Since the 1950s, nuclear has been part of the debate about where Australia should go when it came to their energy. John Gorton proposed in the 50s to build a nuclear power plant. He wanted a 500 megawatt nuclear power plant in Jervis Bay. On his election speech, he said he wanted to take Australia into the atomic age. Clearly, it did not happen, and to cut a long story short, it didn't happen because it was too expensive and it was too impractical. Firstly, New South Wales was the only state that could handle an energy grid for 500 megawatts. Other states were interested in having nuclear energy, but none of them had the technology at the time. Jervis Bay was only picked because it had the necessary facilities, and on top of that, the ACT wanted it close to them because the feds thought, hey, we're paying for it, we want to reap the rewards of it. John Gorton got replaced by Billy McMahon anyway, and the project was stalled for a year. In 1971, the Treasury did an actual comprehensive cost, and they realized really quickly this was going to be way too expensive compared to coal, so it got shelved. So 1998, Howard comes into play, and he's interested in nuclear energy again. It's been revitalized within him, and he wants to build a research facility in Lucas Heights. And the Greens say, you know what, we'll support you, but on one condition. You are not allowed to build any other facilities other than this one, that we don't think nuclear power is safe, as efficient, as costly. We don't want it. We believe at best it needs to be phased out. We'll support this bill, but that's the end of it. And at the time, they didn't believe they were going to need or even have the capacity to build nuclear facilities anytime soon. So he said, fine, I'll put the amendment through. And it passes. The debate was less than 10 minutes, it passed, and later down the line, Queensland and New South Wales put in their own independent bans on nuclear energy, except for the Lucas Heights facility, which is still in New South Wales today. But it's got nothing to do with energy, it's only for research. And that's the story of the ban. Now, the next follow-up question, irrelevant of whether you agree or disagree with that, is if you did want to change that ban, how would you even do it? So there's 4 bills you have to deal with, 2 federal, 2 in the states, 1 Queensland, 1 New South Wales. I'm only going to talk about federal, but effectively everything I'm saying about the federal government will apply at the state level. It's just only state, not federal. That's the only difference. So 2 federal bills, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 and the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Bill of 1998. These effectively stop any nuclear facilities being built. These are the biggest roadblock you have aside from, the actual practical issue that comes with nuclear energy. If you want to change a bill, generally it has to be electorally popular. You don't want to get voted out because you're trying to change the bill, but then you actually have to get it through the House and then the Senate. For the House, there's 151 seats. It's a simple majority. You just need the most amount of people in that chamber to say, yep, let's pass it through. And when it comes to the Senate, it's the exact same, except those are only 76 seats. Simple majority, get it through. Sounds simple enough, except for the fact that if you look up the current makeup of the House and the Senate, this is not getting passed through, even if the Liberals win the next election. It's very possible it could go through the House if the Liberals won the next election. But when we get to the Senate, it gets a lot more complicated. It's way easier to get more seats in the Senate than it is the House. That's why the Greens have a limited number in the House, but if you look at the number of seats they have in the Senate, it is significantly different. If you didn't have the Greens on your side, which will definitely not happen when it comes to nuclear energy, you'll need the One Nations, the Independents, the Bobcatters, the Jackie Lambies, all of those groups. And I'm not even sure that's possible. So in simple terms, if you want to get rid of the ban, it's as simple as the government deciding, let's get rid of it. In my opinion, it would be borderline impossible to get this ban out of the legislation with the current makeup of the House or Senate, or a believable alteration to the House or Senate, even with Peter Dutton winning at the next election.
I don't support the establishment of big nuclear facilities here at all.
I promise you, I went into this with an open mind. I didn't know much about nuclear. I thought this was a really good opportunity to learn. Maybe I'd have my opinion change, but I'm gonna be honest, nuclear energy sounds like it sucks, dude. Let's start with cost. I'm gonna read you some numbers. A large-scale reactor is between $141 and $233 per megawatt hour, with small modular reactors $230 to $382 per megawatt hour. Solar and wind is between $73 and $128. It's not cheaper, and it's expensive to build it too. When the CSIRO looked at the numbers, they got $8.5 billion for one large-scale reactor. Hey, it's me from the future. I learned some more information when I was doing the edit, and I thought I'd share it with you. According to the Climate Council, even if we build the 7 nuclear reactors, it's only gonna be 12% of the energy we need by 2050, so it won't even matter. Now, when it comes to generation capacity, nuclear seems to be winning every time. It can seem a little bit counterintuitive, but a 1 gigawatt nuclear facility actually produces more energy than a 1 gigawatt solar farm or offshore wind system or any other type of renewable system because of the capacity. Capacity is effectively the amount of electricity a generator can produce when it's running at full blast, and nuclear does seem to be better. You would have to build more solar or wind or tides to produce the same amount of electricity as you might have to for one nuclear facility. However, when you look at the cost estimates, they seem to be pretty comparable. Renewables seem to be a lot more reliable because we know we're able to do them. We're already using them in this country, and over time they seem to be getting cheaper a lot quicker than nuclear does. I thought that was a fun fact. Enjoy the rest of the video. Now let's move to timeline. We could have the first one fully operational by 2040. 90% of our coal-fired energy is going to be gone by 2035. That's going to be a pretty substantial gap for 5 years, and the whole point is, in my opinion, Peter Dutton, the Liberals, and the Nationals want to make sure we need coal and gas for as long as possible because it benefits their political movement. But solar and wind already work. We already have them now. The current R&D is operating really well now. Solar and wind are having some of the best advancements in energy the planet has ever seen. We don't want to split our attention to nuclear and renewables, especially when renewables are doing so amazingly now. If we put even more money and effort into R&D, it makes so much more sense than spending billions and waiting so long for nuclear energy. And as for the risk, it is actually really safe. Everyone gets really scared when they think about Chernobyl or Fukushima, but my understanding from everything I could find is that bar a horrific accident, which is incredibly rare, or a terrorist incident, these are really safe facilities. It seems as though the most dangerous part is the waste. But that's really easy to get rid of, right? Wait, what do you mean we bury it underground?
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
That's too damn bad! You keep digging!
The favorite method for disposal is burying it. I am being 100% genuine. I'm gonna oversimplify this a pretty fair amount, but I tried to be as accurate as possible. It's actually called deep geological storage, and the World Nuclear Association recommends burying it anywhere between hundreds to thousands of meters underground. You put in specific materials or storage facilities in place to stop the radiation seeping out, and you leave it there for anywhere between 10,000 to a million years. You have low-level nuclear waste and you have high-level nuclear waste. When we're talking about Peter Dutton's nuclear power plants or the AUKUS submarine, we're talking about high-level nuclear waste. These are the ones that ideally you want a permanent place to store them. Interestingly, I found out nowhere in the world has a permanent place to store their high-level nuclear waste, except Finland. Finland is working on a solution to this problem. Very keen to see what they do with things. Personally, I found it wild no one has a permanent solution, and one, Peter Dutton is rallying for it, and two, we have the AUKUS subs coming up again. What are we doing with that waste? So in summary, we do not have temporary or permanent solutions to nuclear waste, and on top of that, people feel incredibly uncomfortable with the thought of temporary or permanent nuclear waste facilities in their backyard. Remember what I said at the beginning? It doesn't even necessarily matter what the truth is, it's how people feel. The truth may be that it is an incredibly safe process to do so. It doesn't matter though, it's scary to people, and you're going to lose votes, and it's going to be electorally unpopular to try and force in these nuclear waste facilities. Now, just because something's unpopular doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but I think that's important to keep in the back of our heads as well. As for where these actual facilities are going, I've written them down. I'm not going to remember these off the top of my head. You've got Khalid, Tarong, Liddell, Mount Piper, Loyang, Muja, and Port Augusta. I have no idea if I said all of those correctly. A final important consideration is nuclear facilities require a ton of water for cooling. And as such, you either need to place them by the sea or large bodies of water like lakes or rivers. One big issue though, in this country especially, is we're at the behest of the elements and of Mother Nature. And if you have been alive in this country, you'll know that Australia experiences really bad droughts. In those moments, it can be really difficult to cool nuclear facilities. Hey, it's me again. I did some more research and I thought I would be fair to nuclear. If there are droughts, it can affect solar, wind, and tides as well. With solar specifically, it can be harder to wash the panels because there's more dust. During periods of droughts, there's also more clouds, so it's harder for them to get direct sunlight, and it can overall just be more difficult when it comes to maintenance. However, it seems to be the case that if we have effective storage for energy, or we increase funding and research towards batteries, spending the money and time to figure out issues for renewables during periods of droughts is going to be a lot better than figuring out how to solve those issues for nuclear facilities, especially when, as I've said before, it'd be a really scary decision to just be like, hey, let's gamble it on nuclear now. So to be fair, droughts can affect all of these new forms of energy. However, it seems to be putting our backing behind renewables, which you know are a lot more reliable and already exist in this country, seems a lot smarter and safer than putting all of this effort to nuclear facilities, when it also seems as though the ways they're affected by droughts is a lot more impactful than solar, wind, or hydro.
Let's talk about this plan of yours. I think it's good, except it sucks.
So as much as I understand that nuclear is really, really awesome in some European countries, it does not make sense in Australia whatsoever. Nuclear isn't a bad option for a lot of European countries, but we're Australia. We're not a European country. We have an abundance of solar and winds and tides, and it makes sense to stick with renewables. Economically, it's better. From a timeline perspective, it's better. From a safety and storage perspective, it's better. And that's not to say that nuclear is bad necessarily in any single one of those categories, but when we're doing a comparison to the direction Australia is currently going or is planned to go, compared to this huge shift towards nuclear, it doesn't make sense. In my opinion, Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party have one goal and one goal only, and that's keep gas and coal in the pipeline for as long as possible. We already have net zero legislated by 2050, and by 2030, we want those emissions to be reduced by 43%. In my opinion, Peter Dutton and the Liberal strategy allows them to effectively ignore the 2030 target and justify that decision by saying, hey, we're gonna get to 2050 no matter what. Nuclear is gonna be the future, but we need coal and gas in the pipeline so we can manufacture those plants, and also we can ensure the power grid is fueled until the nuclear is up and running. It is, in my opinion, nothing more than a way to keep coal and gas in the pipeline. And on top of that, I brought up The Voice earlier, and Peter Dutton was paralyzed by fear when he didn't have answers about an advisory panel. There are still so many questions about timeline, cost, location, storage, viability. We don't even have an answer to the question how you would get the ban out of legislation. In my opinion, he is being intellectually dishonest and simply trying to get the Australian people to believe he is a better leader using rhetoric. There is no legitimate materialized plan here. It is only rhetoric, in my opinion. I believe Peter Dutton is being deceptive and dishonest. But come join the Discord, come talk about it, come say hi, come let me know what you think in the comments. There was a really good reception to the last video. I hope you enjoy this one as well.